Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think this is one of those conversations that has sort of caught fire across the country, and so I very much appreciate all of our guests joining us here today. We'll have a number of senators who will pop in and out during this hearing. Last Thursday, I spent the day on the Pecos River fishing for brown and rainbow trout. Got a limit. Somebody said, "Why didn't you put that fish back into the water faster?" And I said, because we ate it. A lot of my friends are catch and release. Sometimes I am too, but not all the time. It was a good day. The public lands along the Pecos are among my favorite in New Mexico and the West. They're a reminder of how lucky we are to have places to fish and explore and pass down experiences to future generations. And I want to thank my colleague, Cortez Masto, for joining us here today. As someone who was born in the state of Nevada, we very much appreciate your voice. And lands like these are supposed to belong to every single American. Whether you're born with a family estate or have no land to call your own, you should be able to enjoy the wealth of our public lands. Whether that's harvesting an elk or a long weekend camping trip with your family, these lands belong to every single one of you. And whether you were born in a city or an hour's drive to the nearest grocery store, you should be able to experience the incredible beauty of our public lands across all 50 states. Public lands are an essential democratic part of American culture and identity, and they belong to us. They define us. I like to say for those of us who live in the West, they're sort of the anvil on which our identity was forged. And they were created specifically for future generations to enjoy, even as the world around us changes very rapidly. But right now, public lands are on the chopping block. Until 2 nights ago, Senator Lee's proposal required the sale of 2 to 3 million acres of public lands in the West, an amount that is larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. The parliamentarian blocked this massive public land grab because it violated Senate rules, and I applaud her for making the right decision, but I also know that Senator Lee has made clear that he's, quote, just getting started. Senator Lee has come back a third time now at the last minute with a new proposal. And we're still digging through that to understand what he is trying to sell now, but we know he is still determined to sell off public lands. And that's the point. It's important to understand this is not about housing. This is about divesting of our children's birthright. So we have to stay vigilant. Everyone who loves our public lands, we cannot sleep on the continued effort to push land grab proposals. And we know that some of my colleagues are very serious about taking these places away and giving them to someone else. They've been trying this for decades. Their proposals just keep coming from the White House to the Senate, but we will not let them sell our American birthright to build luxury condos or second homes or to pay for tax cuts. And that's where this money will go. And it's important to realize that under current law, if you were to sell isolated tracts of Bureau of Land Management land, the funding for that would go back into access. It would go back into conservation. It would go back to the people that who own these public lands. 85% of the money from these sales would go to pay for tax cuts. That means that folks like Elon Musk, who already own 4,400 acres of land in Texas alone, worth some $3.4 billion, will make money off the public lands that should belong to the American people. That's horseshit. Once these lands go into private hands, we will not get them back. From the date of sale, the land must be used for what it is sold for, development. It can never be used for conservation, recreation, hunting, fishing, all the things that these lands provide today. Those rivers like the Pecos that you fish in, not anymore. Those forests you gather firewood or get your family through in the winter, tough luck. Those mountains where you mountain bike or hike or just picnic with your family on a Sunday could soon have no trespassing signs. So their claims that this is for affordable housing too are just wrong-headed, because the language doesn't stipulate that it needs to be affordable. And there's no minimum requirement for the number of housing units per acre. That means an out-of-town billionaire can show up, buy a 100-acre parcel, and throw a trophy home on it. And let's be honest, we know that's what will happen. Private equity will be well-placed to take advantage of this. Billionaires will be well-placed to take advantage of this. My neighbors will not. Wilderness study areas, areas of environmental concern, recreational sites, critical habitat, all up for sale. Tribal sovereignty would be undermined because laws that protect Native Americans' rights to access their sacred sites on public land disappear when that public land is privatized. In one fell swoop, these proposals threaten every form of outdoor recreation, every form of natural and cultural heritage and habitat for wildlife, all to pay for a tax handout. That doesn't sound very American to me. And it clearly doesn't sound very American to the hundreds of thousands of people across the political spectrum in the West raising their voices right now, which is why we're hosting this roundtable today. I want to work together to build on the momentum that we've seen around supporting our public lands. Our voices are loud, and I want to bring those voices to the nation's capital so that congressional Republicans and folks across the political spectrum can understand what's at stake. The great conservationist, President, Republican Teddy Roosevelt once said, "Here is your country. Cherish these natural wonders, cherish the natural resources, cherish the history and romance as a sacred heritage for your children and your children's children. Do not let selfish men or greedy interests skin your country of its beauty, its riches, or its romance." That's the task before us, and we are here because we take it seriously. Our participants today represent the entire political spectrum. They represent hunters and conservationists, community members. They each bring their unique voice to this cause, because while the parliamentarian ruled in our favor this week, we know the fight is not over. So I now get to introduce our incredible panelists here today. We have Hillary Tompkins. Hillary is a former solicitor for the United States Department of the Interior under the former President Obama, where she served for 7 years. We have Tawney. Land is a fifth-generation Montanan and former president and CEO of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. As an avid hunter in the West, Land has valuable experience and background in advocating for public land. Jess Johnson. Jess is the Government Affairs Director for the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. She grew up a rancher and is an avid archery hunter. Jess also co-founded the Artemis Sportswomen Group. Mike Tracy. Dr. Tracy works in community health in Powell, Wyoming, where he also advocates for the protection of our public lands and volunteers with the Continental Divide Trail Coalition, something I appreciate because it runs all the way down to the border in New Mexico. Jocelyn Torres is the Chief Conservation Officer for the Conservation Lands Foundation, advocating for public land protection from Las Vegas, Nevada. And as I turn it over to the panelists to each give their opening statements, I invite each of you to start by, if you could, listing a place of value that is at risk of being lost under this proposal. And Hillary, I will start by turning it over to you.
Yes. And, Senator, do you want to make opening remarks? Should I go for it? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Heinrich, for having us here today to have this important discussion on an issue that is critical to the American public and folks today, future generations. This has broad implications across the country. First, I want to follow my Navajo tradition and introduce myself properly. We introduce ourselves with our clans and where we're from, and that's in honor of this panel and gathering and all of you taking time to come meet here today. So Yate, Hillary Tompkins, Nishle, Shehin Nishle, Nahlana Bashishjin, Hotsoy Dashiche, Nahlana Dashanale, Raymond, New Mexico, De Nashan, and I just said that I'm on my mother's side is the Salt Clan and my father's side is the Taos Pueblo Clan, and I come from Raymond, New Mexico. So today I want to share with you my perspective, having served as the Interior Solicitor for a number of years under the Obama administration, and the solicitor is the chief counsel for that agency. And first, as a veteran of the Interior Department, I can attest that the proposal to sell off public lands is in conflict with some very foundational principles that I learned in the Interior Department that are multi-generational principles in terms of managing our land. First, that public lands are for all Americans, and that public lands must be managed for not only today, but for future generations, and that the use of public lands must provide a fair return to the American taxpayer, meaning that they need to be managed in a way that makes fiscal sense and also to ensure that they are preserved and protected for future generations. The proposal to mandate the sale of public lands with no careful assessment of where or why and with no local input does not fulfill these bedrock principles of the Interior Department. Once public land is sold, it's gone forever. And this is something that America's tribal nations understand. We understand that from firsthand experience. And I believe Congress can benefit from learning from the first Americans. One thing I have been told throughout my life is that we lost lands, and the lands that we do have, never, ever sell your lands. America's lands are not for sale, and that is a North Star that we should all be following. Second, I'm not convinced that there's a need for legislation. Interior Department already has authority to dispose of public lands, and there is a process in place to engage with affected stakeholders. And if there's a need to fine-tune this existing process, that's one thing, but a wholesale mandate to sell off public lands in a list of states is ill-advised. Third, there is strong bipartisan opposition to this proposal. Members of Congress, hunters, ranchers, conservationists, recreationists, and tribal nations. And one thing I saw at the Interior Department is that we must seize those precious moments where we have a unity of view, a consensus, bipartisan support for an issue. Those are precious moments in our country right now, and we need to seize on those moments and work together to find a path forward that we can all support. This proposal is being rushed through without proper engagement with affected stakeholders and decision makers. For example, public lands are often located in Indian country, but there's been no outreach to tribal nations, and I'll give you an example. The Southern Ute Indian tribe in Colorado, they have off-reservation hunting and fishing rights right in the Bruno area. That's in the southwestern corner of the state. This area consists of Forest Service lands and BLM lands, and they have had no notification about this proposal, and they have not been given an opportunity to talk about how this proposal could affect their off-reservation treaty rights. Often the response to that is, well, we're protecting valid existing rights. That's a term of art for the Interior Department, but there's no specificity, and there's a lot of ambiguity about what are valid existing rights. And the list provided in the last proposal did not say anything about tribal treaty rights, resources, or land rights. There's also no clear protection for sacred sites and cultural resources of tribes on the public lands that would be sold to the highest bidder. For example, under the original proposal, lands on Mount Taylor in Grants, New Mexico could be open for sale. Mount Taylor is one of the 4 sacred mountains of the Navajo Nation. This is a very precious place for me and my family, and we have conducted important ceremonial life journey milestones involving that mountain. We cannot put these precious places on the auction block. So in sum, Congress must ensure that the Interior Department serves as a steward and not a salesman of America's public lands. The public lands must be managed for the benefit of all Americans today and into the future. Thank you.
Mr. Tawney.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich, for hosting this today. Thank you for the other two senators for coming. We're here to talk about our public lands, our public waters, and our heritage. You were talking about fishing earlier and maybe sometimes not catch and release. We catch and release in Montana, but catch and release into a pan of grease. And so last Wednesday I was on my river, and we caught some brown trout and took them home and ate them. So thank you for bringing that up. Let me be clear that the sale of public lands, even a square inch of public lands, to pay off tax breaks for billionaires is a non-starter. This is our heritage that we were talking about, and to pay off tax breaks for a billionaire, which is a one-time thing, is very short-sighted. And I would say that, the senator said this, I'm going to say it in a different way. Oops. I'm going to say it in a different way. Is that it doesn't matter who you voted for in the last election. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter how much money's in your bank account. These public lands belong to us all, and it's uniquely American. The world is envious of what we have here in the United States. The wildlife belongs to the people, and we have places to go. That's what is at stake here. And right now, in my 25-year career, there couldn't be more threats pointed at our public lands. And so that started when the House first came into session, and they put down rules that said they didn't have to consider the value of public lands if they're going to divest or transfer those lands. That passed in the House as a rule. Then you have Utah, the Supreme Court, they petitioned the Supreme Court to wrest 18 million acres of Bureau of Land Management land. They petitioned the Supreme Court. That did not go through. But they had a $3 million ad campaign that went along with it. Who petitions the Supreme Court with a $3 million ad campaign? They're trying to change hearts and minds. 13 attorney generals from across the West signed on to that. That should make everybody concerned. Then you have the doging of our public land servants, the people that are on the front lines of conservation, the people that are doing the work, the trail work, the people that are making sure that we have access, to make sure that we have opportunities when we go to our public lands. This summer is going to be chaotic. There's already Bureau of Rec lands that were closed for like the opening of fishing season. People are getting mad because these are real impacts on the ground. And then you had what happened in the House. 500,000 acres that were proposed. That ultimately was stripped out. And then we've talked about what Mike Lee is doing. And I look at that map, and he's taken out Forest Service, it looks like now, but it's Bureau of Land Management lands. It's still north of 1 million acres. And as the senator said, this is not about affordable housing. This is just the camel's nose underneath the tent to sell more public land. They do it once, they can do it again. Now, the senator also asked, he said, can you talk about a special place that's under threat right now? If you look at that map, the senator from Montana worked a deal, and so Montana is not included in the 11 western states. And so I'm from Montana, and so none of the places that I go every single day are at threat, but I will tell you that across that border in Idaho is where the elk that I hunt go. That is important. I recreate in other places around the West. That is important. These lands don't just belong to me in Montana. They belong to every single American, so it doesn't matter that he cut out Montana. Those lands are still at risk. And so what's at stake right now is absolutely, I think, essential to the American people. And it's been laid out in Project 25. This should be no surprise to anybody. This is what they want to do. They want to defund, dismantle, and then divest. And divest is just a fancy word for sell it to F off. That is the plan. And it's a one-time deal for people that are chomping at the bit to either make money off of our public lands for themselves or to privatize them for themselves anyways, to have a private playground. So the threat is real, but what I love is that they've kicked the hornet's nest. Back in 2017, Congressman Chaffetz did this, and he got it handed to him in a week. And I've talked to you about this, Senator, but like a week later, he pulls his support from this bill. It's going to sell 3 million acres, and he's dressed in all camo, and he's holding a hunting dog that does not hunt. He said, I heard you people. I will pull back my support for the bill, very bill that I introduced a week ago, which does not happen out here very often. That was because of the pressure back then. Right now, it's even bigger. And what I would say is the difference is that it was really hunters and anglers that led that back in 2017. This picture is much bigger now. If you go on social media right now, and maybe it's because that's where my feed is, but it is all walks of life that are talking about this. Again, Democrat, independents, Republicans, hunters, anglers, bird watchers, kayakers, ranchers, loggers. All these people that depend on public lands and love these public lands are speaking up. Because that's all we have. We have leaders that are sitting at this table right now that we depend on, but all we have in America is our voices, and right now, we are pissed. And so I take a lot of faith that we are pissed. I think people are not only going on social media, but they're creating art. This woman sent me a bumper sticker that was pretty rad that she just did. There's music that's happening. Whatever kind of opportunities they have to tell a story, they are telling that story. And so I have a lot of faith in that. And so we're pushing back. And so what's at stake? Oh, it's just where you go hunt and fish and recreate. Well, that's part of it. But guess what? With that recreation comes $1.2 trillion in the outdoor economy that is based on public lands. Without those public lands, that economy goes away. Now, we talk about the economy all the time. That $1.2 trillion can not only be sustainable, but we can grow it. We have to care and feed it. And so to me, that's at stake. I think it's where we feed our families. I go hunting, I go picking huckleberries. It's a great place for my kids to explore and get off that darn phone. It's for all of us to find solace. It's that place where we escape. And another thing I would tell you is that 70% of our clean water starts on public land. And so as we start to sell this public land in the West, there's this saying, right, that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. It's because water is such a finite resource. And so do we want somebody owning the headwaters of our rivers and have to pay them to actually use our own water? I would say, hell no. So if you think about like what's at stake, it's this outdoor economy, it's our way of life, it's the food that we feed our families. It's this notion of grit as well. And I've got a little story that I'm going to tell you is that I have a daughter who's 16 now, but when she was 10 years old, we went into the Frank Church Wilderness of No Return in Idaho. She was 10 years old. She was the youngest person on this trip. It was hot like it is here. Maybe not quite as humid, but it was hot. So we're walking along on this trail, and the first start of this trail, it's pretty even, but the dust is just every time you step, because it's so hot, it's so dry. We get up, and there's the next third is really steep. We're getting up to this high mountain lake. And she stops talking. And if you know my daughter, she's a lot like me. We're always talking. And so when she's not talking, something is wrong. So I said, hey, what's going on? She's like, I don't feel good. And so we're with a bunch of people, and I said, hey, when are we stopping for lunch? Oh, 20 minutes. I'm like, she can make it 20 minutes. Well, 20 minutes turns into 30 minutes, turns into an hour. We finally stop. She is just beat. I actually picked her up and I stuck her in the water and shook her a little bit. You can't shake babies, but you can shake kids. I shook her a little bit and kind of her face, her color starts to come back. Then I tell her, and this is probably the hardest thing I've ever done, but I tell her the story about Theodore Roosevelt, who got over his asthma by being strong in limb and in lung, which meant he got out into the woods and he walked around. There wasn't inhalers back then. He had to make his lungs strong. So I told her that story and I said, he faced adversity. And that's kind of what you're going through now. But it's up to you what you do with that. And then as a father, the hardest thing I've ever done is I turned away and walked away. And I said it was up to her. And so I come back about 2 minutes later, and I'm like, so what do you want to do? Knowing that if we turn around at that point, that's her decision. She's like, I want to do it. And so she ends up hiking up this trail. It's super steep. She's one of the first people that gets to the lake. She strips down into her swimsuit, jumps into this icy lake. It's like this moment. And now she's 16 years old. And she's going to go to college this next year, and she's going to face all sorts of adversity. But what she learned from that grit that I think is uniquely American, so you have the outdoor economy, $1.2 trillion. You have clean air, clean water, and then you have this opportunity to have young girls find their grit, and so that whatever she faces in the world, she'll be able to deal with. So that's what's at stake, besides a lot of other things, but I want to reiterate how important these places are and what they mean to me as a person, what they mean to my family. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Ms. Johnson.
Senator, thank you for this invitation. When I got this, I said, okay, I want to come here and I want to represent Wyoming and what Wyoming means to me and the voices that I'm hearing all around me in Wyoming. And I don't know if you guys know this, Wyoming's a pretty red state. I am the daughter of ranchers. I'm the daughter of Democratic ranchers. I grew up in Montana, Wyoming, and California. I'm also a ballerina, and I'm a hunter, which is to say that you really can't put any of us in a silo. And I think that demonstrates Wyoming pretty well. We don't do well being told what we're supposed to do. My dad calls Wyoming the FU state because if you tell us something, we say FU and do the other thing. And it's one of those states that I think has a really unique independence to it, but we're 50%, 48% public land. And there is frustration. I think most of this proposal is driven by frustration, which is frankly something that I find the most concerning. It's driven, it's fast-tracked, it's something that, like, legitimate or not, frustration with our public lands is real. Hearing one of the previous speakers talking about how we look at streamlining that, I think is a very good way to pivot something like this. But it has no business being in reconciliation because of many of the different reasons that you're hearing before this, but also because it is, once it's gone, it's gone. And I keep hearing that it's 1 to 5 miles, 1 to 5 miles from a population center. I have a really wonderful story about a public land piece, a BLM piece, 1 to 3 miles from where I live, which is in Lander, Wyoming. I'm an adult onset hunter, and I started, I don't know, I must have been nuts, but I started as an archer, not the way that you would think. I started as a bow hunter, and I was about 21 years old. I had spent the whole last year practicing. The person that was teaching me to shoot archery actually had me blindfolded in front of a target. It's one of the biggest fights I've ever had with a boyfriend at the time, as I really wanted to aim the bow, and he told me, no, form is what matters. So all of this work to go into my first hunting season. And I had also just recently gotten a job with the Wyoming Wildlife Federation, and I was so excited because I was in the hunting world. This is the, Wyoming's oldest and largest statewide hunting organization. And I was walking on cloud 9. I was young. I was there as the public lands coordinator. That was my first title. And walked out onto this public parcel about 3 miles from town. And in July, scouting, found a mule deer. And fell in love with that little piece of public land. These mule deer moved through this parcel onto state land, sometimes into town, sometimes back out. And I spent the rest of the summer watching this mule deer. And on the 11th day of September, I went out there after work because it was 3 miles from town and crawled through the sage, had prickly pear in my hands, had the sun going down over the Wind River Mountains, and I loosed an arrow and killed my first mule deer. And we didn't find it that night in this little parcel. It started snowing. It's Wyoming, September 12th, snow. And came back the next morning, and I hadn't seen where he'd fallen. He hadn't gone 50 yards. And I walked up to this animal, and I had a moment of realization that with privilege comes obligation. And the obligation is to reciprocity and responsibility. And I was on this amazing parcel of public land, tiny, it's little, It's 1 to 3 miles from Lander. It's BLM. It's really nothing special to look at, except it is everything to me. And it's what's dictated my career since then, is that remembering of this connection with this wild animal and my responsibility to keep open landscapes for our next generations and the generations to come. But then I start thinking about it in the larger sense of what does this mean for us with affordable housing discussions. 1 to 5 miles, this is affordable housing for mule deer, frankly. We run the risk of fracturing habitat. We run the risk of subdivisions eking out into migration corridors are something we're always concerned about. So there's a lot of discussion to be had. And going back to the spirit of Wyoming, the way that we have these discussions is community-driven. We wait for the community to come forward and say we have an issue. And when that happens, then this beautiful process that certainly needs work outside of budget reconciliation, that's where we can put our effort, and that's where we put our time. And that's where the stories come forward, where you hear about these moments on these little parcels. And I think there's something really special, because we can talk, hearing about your chance with your daughter is so powerful. And I think about my own moments, and it doesn't have to be wilderness, it doesn't have to be national park. It can be our garden variety public lands, and they're very special. And if we're going to divest of them, or if we're going to dispose of them, it needs to be driven from the stakeholder voice and the people whose backyards and stories are built around that. So I guess my ask is, as we see this, this doesn't have a business in a sort of accelerated version, a sell-off, a budget reconciliation that you can't pull back. It has business in a process that certainly needs work, and Wyoming Wildlife Federation and myself will be there to help that work along. But it belongs there. The people, hunters in Wyoming, even communities, county commissioners have written now. Teton County, Park County, they've both passed resolutions against this, asking to be exempt, similar to Montana. Teton County is where we have a housing crisis in Wyoming. They don't want this. Park County, which is on the other side of the park, they are extremely Republican county, and they are also asking to be exempt from this. So this is not driven from the community's discussion or need. And then the industry ask. There's 45 different gear companies, gun companies, ammunition companies. TRCP and Brad Brooks with our Golly put together this amazing list of sign-ons. That's like a billion-dollar business model right there that's saying we don't want this, this is putting us in danger. So we always go back to the community-driven voice. How do we drive it with our stories? How do we impart the important pieces here? And then, when necessary, look at where the community needs are.
Mike.
All right. Thank you so much for having me here, Senator Heinrich, and for the other senators and the panelists. It's really a privilege to be here to talk about the issue of public lands. I was, so my name is Mike Tracy, and my wife and I moved to Powell with our 3 young children almost 25 years ago. But one of the main reasons we moved there was because of our great enjoyment for public lands in Wyoming and Montana, and we just wanted to be able to raise our kids to, in that setting. And so it's something that's near and dear to my heart and has me energized. So when I landed in Denver yesterday, I checked my email real quick. I knew I was going to have a tight connection, and Rachel had said, "Hey, in light of Senator Lee's changes, do you need to change any of your remarks?" And I thought about it, and I thought, nope. As I was running through Concourse A and then Concourse B, I just kept thinking, gotta speak for the BLM. The BLM is kind of misunderstood lands, maybe not as in the public, in the minds of all the public, but it's equally important land. And so I'm glad that the U.S. Forest Service has been removed from the auction block, but we still need to talk about these BLM lands. So I really feel like a lot of what I had to say has already been captured, so I want to just cover a couple of points. So in my experience in the wilderness that dates back to when I was a kid, my grandparents had a ranch in western Colorado, and they had a summertime grazing allotment on U.S. Forest Service land, a springtime allotment on BLM land. But in my experiences fishing, hunting, hiking, backpacking, it really, the wilderness really transcends a lot of things, including age, profession, where you're from, what language you speak, what music you listen to, on and on and on, and especially and including political parties. And so really, if you tried to make a list of a typical recreational land user, the word eclectic comes to mind, and eclectic just means that something is drawn from a variety of sources. It doesn't speak to the quality of those sources. So it's like if you have one of those friends who has a playlist and you listen to it and they put groups in their playlist where you think, man, I never even thought of those 2 groups on the same day, and yet you have them back to back on your playlist. This is the kind of community that we have that is energized, that uses public land. So I made a list, and it's not complete in any sense, but I have hikers. So hikers doesn't just mean somebody that's just on the trail taking a few steps. You can have day hikers, you can have overnight backpackers, you can have people taking extended trips, you can have through hikers. For the Continental Divide Trail Coalition, there are people every year that hike either from Canada to Mexico or Mexico to Canada, and a 3,100-mile hike. So hiking comes in all kinds of flavors. So sometimes people hike to go find rocks. Sometimes they want to take pictures of something in particular. This Saturday, I have a trip planned to hike the Continental Divide Trail for a little bit, and then veer off the trail in Yellowstone to go find the stake where Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming meet. And that's not something that would probably resonate with a lot of people. Why do you want to go there? And I just want to go there because 100 years ago, somebody put a stake there, and I want to see if it's still there, because apparently the first guy was 6 miles off. So hikers come in lots of different flavors, right? So then there's anglers. You got fly fishing, and then there's some fly fishermen that would stick their nose up at the thought of a trout actually getting eaten. And so there's bait casters, right? There's spin casters. There's some people who catch fish with their hands. As far as I'm concerned, if what you're doing is legal and you're doing it respectfully, then have at it. We've got hunters, so we've got bow hunting, we've got rifle hunting. We got a lot of people in Wyoming who will join a hunting party even if they didn't draw a tag. That means they're going to support their fellow hunters. We have climbers. There's technical climbers. There's free climbers. We have water sports. We have non-motorized water sports like kayaking, canoeing, paddleboarding is really becoming big. So we have motorized sports for fishing, sightseeing, water skiing. We have wheeled vehicles. We have non-motorized, so mountain bikes. Some people take one wheels in crazy places. Motorized, we got people that drive 4x4, side-by-sides, motorcycles, and that really just speaks to mainly the warmer weather sports. So we have the whole realm of winter sports too. You can cross-country ski, snowshoe, downhill ski, snowmobiling. So while this isn't an exhaustive list, it's important to note that one person is not limited to one spot on this list. It's like a really messy Venn diagram, and it makes it really difficult to stick stereotypical labels on people who use the outdoors, and that's what I love about it. So the users of public lands in America are truly eclectic, and I think this is what makes the provision for the mandatory sale of BLM and, until a couple of days ago, U.S. Forest Service land, not just unpopular, but wildly unpopular. And that's not just in Wyoming and other western states, it's across the United States. So I think if anybody really believes that their constituents are in favor of it, and they're even in a conservative state, it might be time to sort of check the temperature of your constituents. I do have a fire about public lands. I went to high school in Colorado, and the high school that I went to started off with a 2-week orientation. It was a wilderness orientation, and it was a pretty amazing experience where you take a group of 8 students and 8 new students, 1 returning student, and 1 faculty member who usually had a lot of outward bound experience, and you go out and spend the first 5 days doing a Forest Service trail project, building a bridge, working on water bars, doing a whole bunch of different things. And what I learned from that was how to work with people that were a completely different background than me, and same thing going through the wilderness for the rest of that 2 weeks. So when we got back to school, even if I didn't hang out with somebody from that group, we were like wilderness family. And so fast forward 40 years now to what I'm doing with the Continental Divide Trail Coalition. It's the same type of family. I mean, it really is people who support each other on the trail, people who support each other at the start of the trail, people who support each other before you even get to the trail. So I'm really grateful for my role with the Continental Divide Trail Coalition as a volunteer trail adopter in the Teton Wilderness. I've really learned some things about myself through this, and I've learned that I love people, I just don't love crowds. So that's really the place for me to be. I started my career trying to decide if I'd be a forest ranger or a game warden, and obviously I didn't do either of those things. So it's kind of a long story, but maybe not really, because what I've realized is that wilderness for me is the key to achieving work-life balance and trying to avoid some of the burnout issues that are plaguing the healthcare profession and many other professions. And so I really enjoy trying to get people exposed to nature, and I don't take everybody on 100-mile hikes. Just exposure to nature, considering what the desires and the needs of the person might be is what I like to do. But there's an author who describes what's happening to kids today as having nature deficit disorder, and I really want to try to help just expose people to nature. So a couple of final points I have. One of them is that, and I'm not an attorney, and I don't remember whether this is truly a concept or not, but when I think about this, when I think about how this has been presented, that, okay, yeah, we have a lot of federal land, right? We have 245 million BLM acres and 190 million U.S. Forest Service. So we have lots of federal land, and we have a housing deficit. So if you put those two concepts in the same sentence, it makes them seem somehow related, maybe even somehow causal, and it makes people not feel comfortable speaking out against it, because who wants to be against affordable housing? And so I think we just need to sort of separate the two and say, yeah, we do have a lot of federal land. Yes, we do have a housing issue, but let's try to figure out how we can just separate that, because I don't think it's proper to say that they're related, and I think it's caused some. It initially caused some people to not want to come out and speak publicly against this, but it's really getting some traction now on social media from all walks of life. So in preparation for today's discussion, I reviewed BLM maps for Wyoming, and it turns out that this issue of land being identified for possible sale, this isn't something that we can just blame on the current administration. This is something that's been going on for a while, where land has, people have been instructed over the years to say, okay, maybe this land could be for sale someday, so, but to do it in this way is just, it's kind of unthinkable. But when I was looking at these maps, I realized the maps of the BLM land in Wyoming remind me of if you took a kid and gave him some paint and said, do what you want to with this map, and maybe they picked up some paint and just threw it at the map. It's kind of like splatter paint. And so it's not what a real estate magnate would do if they said, I want you to go buy a big parcel of land in Wyoming. It wouldn't look like a scatter plot. But it is what it is. It's historical. I mean, the checkerboarding issue in Wyoming has been present since the mid 1800s. So it took years and years to get this way. My favorite thing on the map was that the BLM owns an island in a small river that's private on both sides for a long way, as far as I could tell. But I don't really think that that's causing any problems, and I don't think it gives anybody an excuse to say, yeah, let's sell land somewhere else. So I think that if acquiring public land in a specific area is shown through defined data to be part of the defined housing solution for an area, then transparently using existing laws that would allow the purchase and annexation of local federal land would seem a better solution than mandating that we have to sell a bunch of land. So one final note, this map here has really irritated some people. The nature, the Wilderness Society put that map out, and it really shouldn't, I don't think it should irritate anybody, other than the fact that Montana doesn't have any color on it. That's a bit irritating, but all this is potential land that's potential land, right? So it's as though, so people are saying, well, that's not accurate. We're not going to sell all that land. It's as if you took a picture at rush hour and said, which of these cars is a potential speeder? You would include all the cars because they're all a potential speeder. I mean, that's not to say that they are speeding and that everybody gets tickets, but they're the potential speeders. That's the potential land for sale. And until somebody shows you language that's different than that, you should just keep rolling forward with just the idea that public lands can stay in public hands.
Stories.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator Heinrich, again for hosting this, and thank you to Senator Cortez Masto for always being a partner in ensuring that we make some thoughtful decisions for public lands in Nevada. It's just a reminder. My name is Jocelyn Torres, and I'm the Chief Conservation Officer at the Conservation Lands Foundation. And we represent a broad, nonpartisan national network of community leaders and advocates solely focused on protecting public lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management, all the orange here on the map. The BLM, as mentioned, stewards 255 million acres and continues to be the target of mandated sales. And my connection, like many of the folks here today, is not just professional, it's personal. I grew up in Las Vegas, and I still call this city home. And most of my cherished memories growing up were with my family, camping, taking hunting trips, exploring and riding OHVs in the vast landscapes that we have all around us. And many of those places that I spent time on are now targeted for sale by Senator Mike Lee's proposal. And I'll say, you know, I've already learned firsthand what it means when one of your favorite outdoor places is sold off. One of the places that I spent so many weekends together where we built countless memories was sold off and turned into an industrial project without any notice or without really knowing. And so we were fenced out and could no longer spend weekends there anymore. And I can't take my children there now to, you know, have those same experiences that I once had. And that loss was far more than just losing this one piece of land. It was really about losing a piece of our family's story. The experience opened my eyes to how quickly we can lose irreplaceable spaces. And, you know, we continue to see these places being up for sale, including some proposed additions to the Red Rock Canyon National Conservation Area. This is a part of the Southern Nevada Economic Development and Conservation Act that Senator Cortez Masto has introduced. The area, you know, has 3 million visitors annually. Families like mine who depend on these lands for recreation, for reflection, and for just building, you know, great lasting memories. And public lands are an essential part of my life and lives of so many Americans. And they have value well beyond what can be placed on a balance sheet. I think we've all made that point here today. These places play a vital role in filtering and cleaning air and water, providing vital habitat for species, and they hold significant cultural and historical value. And they provide tranquility in times of uncertainty like we are in now, and numerous recreational opportunities. And as we've talked about, it brings billions of dollars annually to the U.S. economy, and it is a sustainable source of income for so many of our communities. Indiscriminately selling public lands is short-sighted and hurts the vast majority of Americans who rely on these lands and waters. And it certainly won't solve affordable housing problems in communities like Las Vegas. The lack of affordable housing in my community is a serious problem, and it deserves a well-vetted solution. But no one should be fooled that Senator Lee's proposal is an effective solution. The vast majority of public lands in this proposal are simply unsuitable for housing development. And where land availability may be a factor, communities should participate in careful land management planning processes at the local, state, and federal level to determine not only what is appropriate, but also talk about what we may be losing by expanding a development footprint. This careful and inclusive process is what has made the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act and Nevada public land bills throughout the decades so successful. The community is involved in identifying the land sold, and there is a shared understanding that although we're building things that we need, like houses and economic infrastructure, there are also things that we're losing. We've lost, critical desert tortoise habitat and places to recreate. And that often necessary transaction is then mitigated by having the majority of those funds then go back to the state for those improvements. So that's, habitat conservation and restoration, wildfire prevention, and a lot of recreation improvements. Almost any fun place you can go to in Vegas that's outside. I think parks, visitor centers for a lot of these designated places were funded by what we call our SNPLMA dollars. And this whole process is a delicate and thoughtful balance, right, of community needs. It's very much a scalpel approach versus the sledgehammer approach that we're being sold now. And, you know, we have been working, our organization with Senator Cortez Masto, on more of a scalpel approach with the Southern Nevada Lands Bill. And that is, you know, working with several community stakeholders to identify land that may be utilized in the future according to local zoning, right, which the community participates in, planning processes with the community participate in, and then just general overall community input to really responsibly accommodate the expected population growth and all the accompanying economic needs that come with that, while at the same time hoping to place over 2 million acres of public land into conservation to balance all of this out. As I said, I've seen what happens when we lose special places. The fenced-off area where my family used to spend weekends is a constant reminder of that. But I've also seen what's possible when all of our communities can work together. And history has shown that public lands are best managed when we have active community of local people who can work together. We are here today on behalf of communities across America to make it clear that our public lands and waters are not for sale to benefit a greedy few. They are for our children. And for them, we will not stay silent as we continue to get updated proposals from anti-public land politicians attempting to act against the will of the people. So thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I just have to thank everybody for being here today and flying out here and coming to talk such an important issue. As you can see, this matters to so many of us. Most of the public lands that we're talking about are in the West, and it really touches anybody who lives there or who has traveled there to recreate, quite honestly. I'm third generation Nevadan. You can see this map right here of Nevada. Over 80% of the land is owned by the federal government, 60% is BLM land. We have the Humboldt-Tyabe National Forest that runs through Nevada, but most of it looks like that. That looks like almost the Red Rock Calico Basin. Most of it looks like that if you're hiking in Nevada, and you're going to see petroglyphs from our incredible culture and tribes that are there as well. And most of it is farming and ranching. Most people don't think of that. You think about Las Vegas, that's the only thing, and we love when you come to Vegas, but there's so much more to it, and that's what we're fighting to protect. I want to thank, first of all, Senator Heinrich for pulling this working group together here in this roundtable to have this discussion, because I think it is so important that we continue to shine a light on what's happening here with Mike Lee's bill. As we all know, the first iteration of his bill would have sold over 3 million acres of land. It fell out of the rules that we set here in the Senate. The parliamentarian said it doesn't follow the rules here, so he is trying to resubmit it with different text. I'm not sure that's going to satisfy. That will go through the parliamentarian as well. Here's what I do know. I couldn't agree more, Mike, that he is trying to couch this as a housing issue, and that's not what this is. Yes, we can figure out how to address housing in this country, including affordable housing, in a thoughtful, managed approach like we have done in Nevada and other states, but it isn't the wholesale, really, auction of public lands in this country. That's just not it. And so it is important for people to understand and not let him utilize this idea that we need housing, this is what it's about, because it's not. And by the way, if you even look at the language he's submitted over and over again, he doesn't define housing. He doesn't define affordable housing. So it's just what the concern that we all have is who's going to buy this land and who's going to be utilizing it, and then prevent so many of us from outdoor recreation or our livelihoods on it. Let me just say, the other thing is so short-sighted. It is clear they're trying to sell this public land to pay for this reconciliation package, which gives tax cuts to billionaires. That's what this is about. It's what it's about. But it's short-sighted. The outdoor recreation economy in this country is billions of dollars. I know in Nevada alone, our outdoor economy annually is $8.1 billion. That's over 58,000 jobs just in the state of Nevada in the outdoor recreation economy. So why would we forego that revenue to sell off our public lands to these billionaires? It is short-sighted and coming from a place that is not well thought out. And I am hopeful that Senator Lee is paying attention and he is listening not only to all of us, but all of his colleagues who have concerns about this. If he wants to do something in his own state of Utah, more power to you. Go do it. Figure it out. Work with all the stakeholders. Let's do it. But don't come into our states and dictate what should be done. And by the way, if you want to go through this process, it should happen in a thoughtful manner with everybody at the table. You've heard Jocelyn, thank you, Jocelyn, for being here, talk about the importance of stakeholder engagement. Nevada has done that. We already have the Federal Public Lands Management Act. That is a process that we use. Hillary talked about it. In Nevada, over the years, we passed the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act. That's exactly what this is about. How do we get more federal land, bringing all the state, local partners together, government partners with our stakeholders, with the tribes, with conservationists, with our hunters, our anglers, outdoor recreationists? How do we all come together and figure out how we expand the land for our needs and still have conservation? That's what that law does. And that's why the legislation that I introduced is the very thing, brings everybody together. But Mike Lee's provision throws that out the window. Even though he talks about that's what he wants to do, it throws it out the window. That's not what this is. And I can't stress this enough. In Nevada, land, I can tell you, we're hearing from so many people. So for that reason, Senator Heinrich, I just, for the record, for 2 letters today. One is from the Washoe Tribe of Nevada and California, who are opposed to the land sales, especially those that would increase development around Lake Tahoe. And I also have one from a coalition of organizations from Nevada's hunter and sportsman community who are concerned about the precedent being set of selling public land to pay for tax cuts and the reduction of access to our public lands for outdoor recreation. I also have received, I cannot tell you, my phones and my emails have been lit up by this. I have received into my office, over 400 people have called my office in the last 2 weeks, and over 6,600 people have written into my office to tell me they don't want our public land sold off to billionaires for this tax giveaway. It is important for my colleagues and Mike Lee to pay attention to what people are saying here. This is not the appropriate vehicle. This is not the appropriate time. And the language he has is not appropriate for what he is trying to achieve here at the end of the day. He needs to be listening to us. I'm all for figuring out how we get more housing and affordable housing, but it has to be done in a thoughtful process. And by the way, it has to include local zoning laws. How do we throw out a whole department and education around zoning that we need in our communities? So we are doing a thoughtful process in our population centers. The other thing his new text does not do, he talks about a boundary outside of a population center, but he doesn't define what a population center is. That could be in my state. You can go into Baker, Nevada. There's probably a small little community, not even 100 people. That could be that's a population center. It could be somewhere in the middle of Winnemucca, where there's Paradise Valley, a post office, and maybe a couple farms. That's a population center. But you know what happens around that population center? Hunting and hiking and outdoor and off-road recreation. So he is not being thoughtful about this process, and I can't stress this enough. My hope at the end of the day is he is listening to all of us, and he just withdraws it. And if he doesn't, looking forward to the parliamentarian taking a serious look at this and if there's any change to it. But let me, because I'm going to take advantage of you while you're here. And Jocelyn, let me ask you this first question. And I can't thank you enough for traveling. Jocelyn's story is my story. My father loved the outdoors. You grew up in the West. My father, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, they hunted. They camped, they hiked, they fished. all over the land. That's how I grew up as a young girl from my father, taking his 2 daughters out and showing us the beauty of nature of Nevada and California, or in Utah and Wyoming, and so many incredible places. So Jocelyn, talk a little bit, if you would, about SNPLMA. Not just the fact of the stakeholders that are involved, but also the importance of the funding through SNPLMA. The funding does not go into the Treasury, which all of this federal land does. If they sell it off at fair market value, it goes into the Treasury. In Nevada, we were very thoughtful about how we protect and preserve. So would you talk a little bit about that funding, why the importance of getting some of that money back into the state when you actually do have a thoughtful process for selling federal land that everybody agrees to, that money comes back into the state of Nevada. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you've done with the Conservation Lands Foundation?
Yeah, that's right. And I think the other part too is that it sets a parameter of exactly what lands will be sold. It's not the scatter plot paint thrown. You know, there is a ring around, okay, this is what our community needs as part of our zoning and planning and outlooks of, you know, land that we will need to grow, right, in a sustainable way. And the money then gets divided out into all of the things that you would think of if you're creating a new town, you know, or expanding one. You need water infrastructure. You need schools for the school kids that are going to move in and the families. And you need to then mitigate for the things that you've now taken their habitat away for. And so the funding really sets it up in a way that, you know, the state gets some money, the infrastructure that we need gets some money. We have money for things that communities are going to need, like education, parks, right, trails, just improvements generally. And you're also then mitigating for the damage, right, that you've caused, because development causes damage, whether we need it or not, it does. And so we've been able to then put money towards tortoise habitat restoration, fencing, you know, making sure that the population is able to be successful and the community can enjoy it. I mean, all of these parks that I mentioned, these recreation visitor centers, they are the reasons why people want to move to Las Vegas. And so it just continues to create this cycle for the community where you're getting benefits from all sides. And that's what makes it worth having. And that's why it's been a successful and thoughtful, you know, process, which would be, you know, I know they want to replicate it in other places. But I think that those are the core components. It's land that people, you know, can use. We're still setting aside places and improving those places with the funding, you know, for the habitat restoration, for the recreation improvements. And so the whole community benefits and is able to grow and be successful.
Thank you. And then one final thing, and maybe Landon, you touched on this, so I'm going to ask you a little bit more about it. There's been a group of us working that are the states, the basin states along the Colorado River. That's just one water source, but it's one we know that is key to all of our states that are along that Colorado River. And we have worked together in a bipartisan way as senators to put funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, about $4 billion, to ensure that funding goes back into the Colorado to look at how we conserve water, look at new water projects that will recycle water, how the states we can incentivize the states to engage in that conservation and preserve more of that water. What Mike Lee has put into this legislation, how does that address the water needs of the western states? Is there anything in it that he even thinks about to address the water needs that are a key for all of this?
I don't think he thought that through. I don't recognize that language in there at all. And I think that, you know, as I talked about before, and you know well, you're doing this because water is such an important resource, and you're living in a place that's very arid. The West is arid in general. And so I think keeping these public lands and public waters in public hands, and one of those things in this bill is it doesn't designate who actually can buy this. This can be foreign entities that buy this. Do we want some foreign company owning our water? I would say no, again. And so no, he does not address that.
Well, let me just add a finer point to this, because most people, this is why should be a thoughtful approach. In Nevada, we have Nellis Air Force Base, we have Creech Air Force Base, we have a Naval Air Station, we have Hawthorne Army Depot. I can guarantee you there are foreign entities coming and purchasing land around some of those areas. And we have fought at the federal level to pass legislation to make sure that that cannot happen. But there is nothing in this language that prevents some foreign country that wants to come in and continue spying on the activity that happens in Nevada, where we do a lot of the training for our military. There's nothing that stops them from purchasing that land. And that is a concern.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Hillary? Because I know we've talked.
Yes.
So Hillary and I go way back because when
Yeah.
I was Attorney General, she was working at the Interior, and we worked together on a number of issues for Nevada. I appreciate your being here.
Yes. So definitely there's concern about just not doing that land management planning process. Like right now, Interior Department can look at lands and consider, should we have these be looked at for potential different use other than BLM use? That is in the law right now. But there is a process where you do land management planning, where you look at issues like water use, habitat impacts, utility availability. What is the interest of the community in terms of wanting to have that change in the land status from federal public land? And then also just being sure that there is the right assessment of the economic need for this change in the land status. The law currently says, and Congress was wise about this and looked at, is there an economic use that justifies this transition in changing the land tenure of the United States? So all of these things are not laid out in the current proposal when it is in the existing law. So we don't need to change something that already works.
Welcome, Senator Hickenlooper. We'll turn it over to you for any questions you have for our panel.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to you guys for being here. Appreciate that how busy you all are and that you squeeze this in at your own social peril, as my wife sometimes refers to it. Let me just start with Ms. Torres. And we've been hearing from local governments, not just across Colorado, from Lyons to the Rocky Mountain National Park, all the way down to La Plata County in the far southwest, but around the west, asking us to do everything we can to stop this sale of public lands. In Colorado, we've got a $17 billion outdoor recreation industry that is really universally spread over the entire state. They also contribute to our watershed health, our wildfire management, in many ways to our quality of life and our mental health. So, Ms. Torres, can you speak to how local governments see the threat of public land sales of these well-loved places in their backyards and how they look at that threat?
Yeah, I think Ms. Johnson mentioned this earlier. A lot of, local municipalities are passing resolutions saying they don't want this. And part of the reason they don't want this is because they weren't consulted, right, about what lands maybe were helpful or available for them. Their communities benefit, as you mentioned, Senator, by the recreation, and know that that's a sustainable source and that the community is not going to get any of this money from the land sales because it's going for tax breaks. So the community is losing and not gaining anything, and I think that that's generally why so many people are calling all of your offices to say no, and why so many, local city councils, county commissioners, county supervisors, state governments, right, are passing resolutions and making statements opposing this proposal.
Right, we agree. Ms. Tompkins, there you are.
There I am.
I was looking at my fellow senator there for a second. Peripheral vision, not what it once was. Ms. Tompkins, I understand that you represent the Southern Ute tribe in Colorado. And can you share some more about the concerns? And I might have missed this, so you can rephrase it in a fresh way. But not just the Southern Ute, but other tribes. That you've mentioned this before regarding the challenges that the tribes face with a massive sell-off like this.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Yes, Southern Ute Indian tribe in southwestern Colorado is concerned because they have off-reservation hunting and fishing rights on an area that includes BLM lands. And they're very concerned because they have not heard from anyone who is advocating for this proposal about the impact on those off-reservation treaty rights. And I mentioned earlier, too, this proposal does not have any clear carve-outs to protect tribal treaty rights, tribal trust lands, natural resources. And the other thing I'll add from my comments earlier is that tribes are interested in not only being aware of these proposals and engaging in them meaningfully, but also exploring issues of co-management of those lands, as well as having a right of first refusal to acquire lands if they are proper for disposal. These lands are in their ancestral territories or within their reservation boundaries. So this is something that they feel they need to have a seat at the table and to be heard before there's a blanket proposal proposed in Congress without their input.
Great, thank you. I could not agree more. Mr. Tawney, and only if I could have had a name like Land Hickenlooper would have balanced out the challenges of Poop and Scooper and Chicken Cooper and my childhood. Mr. Tawney, we've seen a coalition of Colorado hunters, anglers, wildlife enthusiasts, bird watchers, I mean, go down the long list, that have been, as far as I know, in complete opposition to this massive sell-off of land. And one point that, that we heard again and again is that the Republican bill, the reconciliation bill, would use the proceeds of these sales for a budgetary effect, basically to provide tax cuts. Under current law, the federal government can already conduct public land sales. I think this was mentioned earlier. And under certain authorities, that money gets reinvested in projects that expand access and conservation. So in many cases, mitigates problems of ranching or farming, or it works on habitat. But I think to sell these prized public lands and put the money totally to provide a tax benefit largely for a smaller number of people, kind of goes against the tradition of public lands, the long and storied history of public lands. Can you speak a little more on the concerns from the hunting and angling community regarding this sale?
Absolutely. And I will tell you that, while my name is Land, that also came with lots of teasing called water and mud a lot too. So I was not free from that. I said this earlier, but, in the West in particular, but all across America, and every American, we own 640 million acres. I grew up in Montana. I'm a fifth-generation Montanan, but my family did not own land. We were timber folks, and we were morturers. And so I don't have a ranch that I inherited. But what I do have is this vast estate that belongs to everybody. So public lands are essential to hunters and anglers and anybody that's going to be recreating outdoors. It's a place that doesn't matter, again, how much money you have. And so they are these public lands are places that are just part of the fabric of life, I would say, and are interwoven. And where that's, again, we're going huckleberry picking, we're fishing, we're hunting, we're just rafting down the river. These areas are essential to us. And so you've seen this pushback. I get texts all the time from National Wild Turkey Federation to raise money. I got a text from them to Congress to ask me to come out and talk to you guys in Congress because they knew that this was such a big deal. That's the first time I've ever gotten a text from them that was not related to raising money. There's statements from the Boone and Crockett Club, Congressional Sportsman's Foundation, Elk Foundation, Ducks Unlimited, you name the organization that have come out against this. They're all stacking up against it because they know how essential this is to the things that we love, but also how essential that is to the local economies that depend on hunting. It's like Christmas. Every 3 months of hunting season is like Christmas for 3 months. That's where they make their money, is when the hunters show up in these rural communities. And so not only is it, I think, important to hunters and anglers, but it's also important to the partners we have that are private landowners where we hunt as well, but also these local communities. And without that public land, those hunters are not going to show up.
Right. No, again, I could not agree more. And I think there are certainly lots of places, public lands, old armories, places that can't be sold easily. We might want to find ways to, with local community input and the support of governors and general assemblies, look at easier ways to get federal lands to be more used more propitiously, more successfully. But obviously, taking that money and just putting it as a budgetary fill doesn't do that. Ms. Johnson, last thing with you, when I was governor, I had a great relationship with Matt Mead, as I'm sure you're aware. One of the things that we did very successfully was we were able to address issues like the sage grouse, potentially endangered species, and by getting all these governors to work together with the federal government, we could address the issues around habitat so that every rancher, every oil and gas company, every angler and hunter, we all had a common self-interest in saying, all right, how do we make this habitat better? And how can this rancher put different types of fencing in? How can the oil and gas choose different times to drill their wells? Everyone was unified because the land wasn't broken into, checkerboards or small portions of private property. And I think that's something that I know most of the federations around wildlife. There are many different wildlife federations, but Ms. Johnson, if you could just speak to that a little bit of the potential obstacles that are created by compartmentalizing these broadly scattered pieces of land.
Senator, thank you, and thank you for being here. And looking at the landscape of the West is not an easy. It's not one thing. It's state land, it's BLM, it's Forest Service, it's private land. And, I think one of the dangers of this proposal is its sort of blanket approach to that. And I talked earlier about things that are being community driven, and we talk about sage grouse, we talk about the work there that happened. It happened because everybody from across the aisle, everybody, wildlife, oil and gas, we were all sitting at the table working together. And we were talking to the communities that were dealing with this. And Wyoming does have, we do have checkerboard issues in many places. And it does cause problems with management sometimes. It makes it hard. But looking at how we fix that, it goes back to that table where we started talking with sage grouse. It's us coming back to the table and figuring out which parcels make sense to maybe block up and make management easier for wildlife. I do a lot of work on migration corridors, and Wyoming has one of the longest ungulate migrations other than the caribou herds. We have mule deer that go sometimes 255 miles, so from the southern part of Wyoming all the way up to Island Park, Idaho, all the way through our state. And they travel through fencing, they travel through private lands, state lands, but there's places in these that are called bottlenecks. And they're not, they're state-driven on looking at how we deal with this. So again, it was back at the table, figuring out, okay, where does it make sense to develop and where doesn't it? But there's these places called bottlenecks where if that parcel were to be sold and developed on, it would interrupt a migration that has been going on far before we were there. And we know that because we can see archaeological sites of where tribes followed these migrations all the way along this corridor. So what we're interrupting is something, again, we go back to the community. We want to know the stories. What does that mean? What is the value of that parcel? Is it valuable for housing? Some of these parcels are 1 to 5 miles from communities. They're close. They're important habitat. So when we look at the wildlife management landscape, again, it has to come from the voice of Wyoming on how we're going to deal with that. It has to be something where we're sitting at the table and having all the stakeholders there. I think the sage grouse model is one that I'm really proud of my state for the work they did with you and others to come to that, and there's still work to be done. But yeah, I think that when you look at the checkerboard and the landscape that we have opportunities to fix it. And I think our current governor, Governor Gordon, sees some of those opportunities and wants to figure out how we do this in a Wyoming way. But this budget reconciliation is not it. It is not the Wyoming way. It is not us sitting at a table with all of our stakeholders. It is not us figuring out where the compromises make sense. And I would just say that where I see my state wanting to go is, sure, let's have this discussion, but not here and not now.
Right. And I couldn't agree more that every one of these conversations should start at the table with local groups and make sure that's where the framework is discussed and established. So anyway, I'll yield back the floor to the chair.
Oh, thank you very much. And I mean, just great questions all around from my Senate colleagues this morning. Just I have a photograph in my office that I believe was taken in Wyoming by a guy named Joe Reese. And he really documented very well how wildlife migrates over the landscape. And so you have Yellowstone National Park, and that's where all the wildlife is in the summertime. Where are they in the wintertime?
Especially in southwestern Wyoming, Senator, they are on parcels of BLM that could look flat and empty, but when you get out there, realize are very much not. They're on these sagebrush parcels, sometimes 1 to 5 miles from the communities and population centers. And they are the iconic herds of Wyoming. If you hunt the Wyoming range and you come down in the winter, outside of Kemmerer or outside of Green River, Wyoming, or Rock Springs, Wyoming, or Farson, Wyoming, you don't have to go 5 miles to see mule deer of trophy level quality grazing on BLM lands. And I think that's one of the most important parts. We had a really rough winter a couple years ago that really impacted our mule deer, and the state has done a Herculean effort through the Wyoming Game and Fish Department to help bring that back and help work on that recovery. But that is essential to have that habitat unfractured, unfragmented, and we can figure that out by sitting together and figure it out. But you can't just arbitrarily put housing in a place and interrupt something that has taken the whole state years now to help bring back. That habitat is vital, and it's vital to hunters, it's vital to the wildlife species, it's vital to Wyoming's heritage and what we value there, and it goes hand in hand with the value that we have of the Wyoming way.
Ms. Tompkins, there's an area outside of Santa Fe, within the 5-mile boundary of Santa Fe, Caja del Rio, and it has a very long and storied history with New Mexico's tribes. Should tribal governments be at the table before something like that is sold off?
Absolutely, and I also believe it's critical that we ask them about the sacred cultural significance of these places and be sure that we give them a seat at the table so that they know they can provide really important knowledge about these places, and also be sure that the next generation of local communities, tribal, non-tribal, within these regions, they are going to inherit what we do. And that is a very strong principle in Native culture. And we really need to do this right, because whatever we decide today will affect the next generation in a profound way. And we have in the West population centers that are very close in proximity to the sacred lands of tribal nations. But I also want to say it's sacred to all Americans. One of the things that I think is really important, and we've talked about it a little bit today, is that being in the outdoors and having that connection with nature and a sense of resilience. We've talked about that. I have my own story about learning how to mountain bike in Moab with my husband, who put me out on the trail. It's very intense mountain biking out there. Some people might look at that as just outdoor recreation, that is a pastime. That was not a pastime for me. That was really arduous, challenging, but pushed me to my limit And I came back a stronger person. And things I learned on the trail, I apply in my everyday life. And I think turning it back to Native culture and identity, why that's so important to this discussion is we have those belief systems that human beings are stronger, healthier, more in balance with the universe if they have these connections to these really important, powerful places. It's the power of place. And so just putting out criteria that's undefined about population centers does not, it misses all of that. And I think that's the risk that we're seeing. So yes, important to have all voices at the table. And I do think the First Americans can bring a very strong voice to this conversation.
I think Senator Hickenlooper has one more question, and then I'll sort of wrap things up, and we'll make folks available for the press if anyone wants to chat with us.
Yeah, I didn't get to this one. I was trying to stay within my 5 minutes, but then I figured, well, what the hell? Sorry. Dr. Tracy, I wanted to just touch base with you. We spent a lot of time talking about the economic value of outdoor recreation and how powerful it is for our community. But I remember even going back when I was mayor, and we were trying to attract young entrepreneurs. So Metro Denver now has over 1,000 miles of bike trails. And we have more access to our hiking trails than ever before. We continue looking at these things. You think we're getting to the point where we can actually see the health benefits of this work? I know you've done a lot of trail work as well. When we open additional trails, find more access to get people on the trails, that reflects public health benefits as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's something that's probably not as well quantified as you would like, just because the medical literature kind of responds to funding, for pharmaceuticals and procedures. But I think there's a lot of data that spending time outside, and it doesn't have to be extreme outdoor sports, but spending time outside is helpful in a couple of key areas. So one is mental health. And the other would be cardiovascular health. How to quantify that is kind of difficult. But the other point that I would make is it's not just the value to that community. People who live in New Mexico and Colorado and Wyoming and Montana. We have people that come out and recharge their batteries in our states and then go back, and the health benefits benefit the community that we'll never know anything about. How much benefit there is to the mental health of people, even not from our states.
That's a good point. Great, thank you. I yield back.
This has been a great conversation. I want to thank everybody for participating this morning. I've heard so many times, these aren't national parks. They're not our crown jewels. And I thought what summed it up, one of you said something to the effect that these lands may be nothing special, but they're everything to me.